We got rust holes here. I like how I'm using a piece of rust to point. That's If there's something that's always certain on projects like these, it's that the rust is always worse than you initially imagined. I mean, you just look at it and it seems like it might be a little rusty, but then you open it up and inside there's so much more rust than you imagined. Or under your paint, there's rust that you didn't think was going to be there. So you must keep that in mind when you plan to take on a project like this. You got to know that you're going to need the patience to deal with rust problems like these, and we're gonna go over a few of them that I've fixed in this last week, a couple things that I've finally finished that I've been working on for a few weeks, and basically we'll be going over how I managed to get this from being all pitted and rusty or kind of like surface rust down to clean metal so that it could be epoxy primed, as you do not want to paint over rust that's been neutralized with OSPHO. When it turns black and it's neutralized, you can't really paint over that with epoxy primer. You can with POR 15, but I'm not going to paint the side of my bus with POR. I want to paint it with epoxy. Epoxy can only really be applied over actual clean metal, so we have to get all the metal down to where it's clean, and we're going to be going over all that in this video. If you're going to be having your bus soda blasted or dipped in some kind of acid, then this video doesn't really apply to you. But if you're just the regular restorer doing it in your garage, I've found this to be the easiest method. I hate using the carbide disc to remove all the paint on big panels, so I like to use Aircraft Stripper Ultra. It's the only paint stripper that I've found that actually works. And I like to abrade the surface first with like a 40 grit sandpaper so that it really sinks in there. And then I just coat it with the paint stripper, let it sit, scrape it off, and then coat anything that's left with paint stripper. And by the end of it, you're pretty much left with a pretty paint-free surface, which unfortunately exposes all the rust that was under your paint or wherever the paint had chipped. Rust formed under there, and that's all gonna have to be dealt with in order to get it paintable. This is the method that I've developed through trial and error. Essentially, I spray everything with OSPHO and let it sit for a while. Then I'll go over it with the carbide disc, essentially to get rid of any of the superficial rust that's just on the surface and leave the more pitted rust behind that we'll deal with later. I'll then go over it with red Scotch-Brite and some water to neutralize the OSPHO, clean the surface up, and then we could kind of see where we're at. These darker patches are essentially neutralized rust, but like I said earlier in the video, we need to get it all the way down to clean metal. So for that, we will be using the trusty navel jelly, which essentially is the same thing as OSPHO. The active ingredient is phosphoric acid, but navel jelly, since it is a jelly, does a better job at clinging to the surface. But while the navel jelly is doing its thing, we're gonna finish the repair on this rear window sill that I had started a few episodes back, but I didn't have this little clip where the outside trim thing clips onto. We're gonna spray both surfaces with a good old zinc-rich primer, as anywhere where you have metal sandwiched, it's a good idea to get some zinc primer in between there. And then it was a little difficult to get it to kind of clamp into place, as I didn't really have a clamp that was gonna do a good job at that.
Oh, this is gonna be fun. What the f?
But finally, I got it clamped into place. I tacked it up on the two ends and then the middle and test fit it. Looks pretty good, so now we can go ahead and get the rest of it welded up and all buttoned up. With that all buttoned up, we could get back to the fun part, which is using a lot of elbow grease to remove what rust is left on the panel. I like to do this by spraying it with some OSPHO once again, and then using a coarser wire wheel, I'll go in there and carefully grind the rust out. Now you don't want to get the metal too hot because you can warp it and create like dips wherever you're trying to get the rust out, so you want to take your time with doing it. I found that changing the angle at which I am wire wheeling into the pit tends to get the rust out. And basically, you spray the OSPHO, you will see the rust pit turn black, wire wheel it, spray it again. If it turns black, there's still rust in there. Keep repeating the process until when you spray it, it no longer turns black. That means there is no longer any rust in there and you are down to bare clean metal. Another important part of the process is actually spraying it down with water and wiping it off. Now this does a couple things. One, OSPHO gets very sticky and it'll just clog up your sandpaper when it comes time to sand it. But also the process of putting water on the OSPHO creates a chemical reaction which neutralizes the acid, and also you'll see a haze on it. That haze is actually like a zinc rich haze, which is actually good for the metal. I'll just keep repeating this process over and over until I'm left with a completely clean metal. And after all that hard work, we are left with this nice, beautiful, clean metal surface. A surface that you would never believe is hidden under all of that rust. But as beautiful as it looks, there is still a problem area. And this problem area is one that I noticed long ago. Wheel well looks good in here, and this part is solid, but for some reason it rusted here. That, I couldn't tell you why. I've never seen this be solid and this be rusty, but probably cut out there and chase the rust. Rust is like cancer. You must eradicate it all or it will come back. Now I finally figured out what caused it, and you'll see once I cut this piece open exactly what caused this problem. And yes, there was a lot more rust in there than I had imagined. But unfortunately, it was due to the fact that there was probably a squirrel living in there, and he created a nest above the wheel well, kind of behind where the gas tank is, and that completely rotted it out from the inside, unfortunately, because other than that, the wheel well is good. It was pretty damn solid, and it kind of made me a little sad, but with a little more fabricating, we should be able to tackle this, no problemo. I soaked the inside of it with some navel jelly and OSPHO, and while it was doing its thing, I decided to fix this little rust hole on the passenger side. I don't have a brake or any good way to make 90-degree bends, so what I like to do is make some of these patches out of scraps that already have bends made into them. This is a leftover piece of funky green metal that happened to have a couple 90-degree bends. So what I'll do is, using some cardboard templating and just trial and error, I'll start cutting pieces, and then where I have my second 90-degree bend, what I like to do is get the two pieces that I'm working on and mate them up to each other. I give it a couple tack welds on the outside, then I can flip it over and weld the seam on the inside. This essentially gives me a nice solid 90-degree bend that I don't have to worry about bending. And this technique, I have used it before and it looks good. Now I don't want to bore you guys with the entire process, as I've done little patches like this before, but if you're interested to see in more detail how I fabricate these parts, let me know in the comments down below. I'm not the best fabricator, but I'd say that I'm one that's relatable to the regular man who doesn't know how to fabricate. Of course, I coated the inside of it with zinc primer, and then it was time to get things held in place with some magnets and get it all welded up. And of course, when you're welding any sheet metal that's kind of thin, you're going to want to take your time and space your tacks apart. One, so that you don't blow a hole through your metal, and two, so that you don't warp it, and when you grind it down, it comes out nice and smooth. Now it is a process. You're going to do some spot welds, grind it down, and then see where you're missing the connections, spot weld it again, and then get it all ground down smooth. In the end, it ended up looking pretty nice. I'm quite happy with it. I didn't think it would come out this good. I didn't think it would be this easy, but there is still so much work left to do. As you can see, I'm starting the cardboard templating of doing this piece down here, which I have already done on the driver's side, so I'm not going to go into too much detail in the next episode, but we are going to be moving fast so that we could keep tackling this project, keep having fun. So thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all on Wednesday. Sometimes it comes back.